Hello there, welcome to my review of the 2021 film The Suicide Squad, starring a whole bunch of people, but mainly Margot Robbie reprising her role of Harley Quinn, Joel Kinnaman returning as Colonel Rick Flag, Idris Elba playing Bloodsport, John Cena as the Peacemaker, Danielle Melchior is Ratcatcher 2, and David Dastmalchian is Polka Dot Man, with Sylvester Stallone voicing King Shark. It's written and directed by James Gunn. So, the spoiler-free review of this film. The basic premise of the film is similar to the 2016 film. A group of criminals are given the chance to knock 15 years off their sentence if they take part in a suicide mission for a secret government agency. And if they misbehave on that mission, they have their heads blown up. Their mission is to stop a threat that a legitimate government agency cannot be involved with and is highly likely to involve their deaths. The difference between these two films is that this film does everything better and wasn't edited by 20 children in 20 minutes. The actual plot of the film is to destroy a weapons base in a country that has just been through a coup, where a military dictatorship has overthrown the previous dictatorship that was slightly less evil and slightly more friendly to the US than the new regime. The plot is largely superfluous though, because this film uses the plot mostly to explore the characters and their motivations, and it does so very well. It's rated R in the US and 15 in the UK because there's a lot of swearing and a lot of violence, so this definitely isn't a film for young children. It is not family-friendly entertainment. I really enjoyed the film. The plot, the performances, the direction, the editing, the dialogue and the action is all top notch, and for me it's easily the best DC film since Dark Knight Rises. It's a film that gets better the more times you watch it, as you pick up more on the themes and subtleties of the script. It takes big and small satirical swipes at big and small targets, but never feels preachy, and so it can be enjoyed at face value even if you don't notice or agree with some of its targets. In that respect, it reminded me of the best kinds of 80s action films, without any obvious nods to them, except one that you'd have to be a real film nerd to spot. I would definitely rate this as nothing but the best. On to the spoilers. I'm not going to spoil the plot too much, but I will be talking about which characters die. So if you don't want to know, watch the film first. The film kicks off at lightning pace, introducing us to the squad, consisting of James Gunn regulars Michael Rooker as Savant, Nathan Fillion as TDK, and Sean Gunn playing the CGI Weasel, plus returning characters Captain Boomerang, Rick Flag and Harley Quinn, as well as newcomers Javelin, Mongal and Blackguard. This team gets killed immediately, including Captain Boomerang, but with the exception of Flag and Harley. With this, Gunn immediately sets out his stall and lets us know that no one is safe, which is a pretty big departure in the comic book genre. None of the deaths are notable or noble, and none come with the heroic sacrifice that we might have expected, which is a brilliant decision because it establishes that doing dangerous stuff like this has actual consequences, and dying is easy, horrific and important when telling a story. It's a bit like the superhero movie version of the opening of Saving Private Ryan. It turns out that this team was probably always a distraction for another team to get in unobserved, showing us that Amanda Waller, head of the operation, doesn't care about any of the people involved and sees them as pawns to be used for her purposes, entirely disposable. Why else would she have Rick Flag, the only non-criminal, lead this useless team? We then flash back to the other team being selected and establish the main characters, mostly Elba's Bloodsport, who only joins because Waller threatens to imprison his daughter, who he has an incredibly difficult relationship with. He is trying to drive her away because he doesn't want to be a father, knowing what kind of person he is. This is one of the major themes of the film, the importance of positive parental figures. Bloodsport doesn't want to be a father, because his own dad messed him up so much that he doesn't think he has the ability to care about anyone else but himself. Polka Dot Man has a psychotic hatred of his mother, who experimented on him as a child with a virus that gave him his powers in a failed effort to turn her kids into superheroes. King Shark doesn't have any family or any friends, so he's desperately lonely, but also is still a talking shark who might eat you. Harley is desperate to be loved by someone who won't abuse her and will show her the kind of unconditional love you would expect from a parent. There's been some criticism for Harley having a subplot that removes her from the team for a large portion of the film, and I can see why that bothers some people, but I think it shows how alone she actually is emotionally by showing her literally on her own. She wants to be part of a family, even though she's been driven insane by how much abuse she has suffered. She then finds happiness, but it turns out it's with another psychopath. Not an explicitly dangerous one like the Joker, but one that on the surface seems completely normal and would fit in perfectly in a lot of companies or governments because he's evil in a socially acceptable way. She doesn't want to be part of the team at this point because she doesn't need the team, until she realises he's a monster and no longer wants or needs another monster in her life. If she had been integrated into the team earlier, it would have lacked any sort of emotional journey for her, and she would have been reduced to eye candy who says crazy things every now and then, as she was in the first film. Peacemaker has virtually the same backstory as Bloodsport, but isn't as self-aware as Bloodsport, so he blindly idolises his country as a substitute for having loving parents. His character is reflective of one of the minor themes of the film, the nature of patriotism. He believes in peace at all costs, even if it means killing anyone he thinks isn't good for the country, or in this film's case, destroying any information that might make the US look bad. Even when presented with the hard evidence that his country might not be the greatest country in the world, he is so brainwashed that he is willing to hide any evidence of their wrongdoing, never quite understanding that true patriotism is ensuring your country lives up to the high standards it sets for itself and others. I wouldn't be the first to compare this character to Captain America, but he is the version of Captain America that a government wants, one that doesn't think for himself. Ratcatcher 2 is the only one who has a good relationship with her father, who really loved her, but he was a homeless drug addict, which she has come to terms with because he always loved her, despite his failings. She is the heart of the film, the least damaged of the team, and the one who truly believes in the goodness of others based on what she was taught by her father. The secondary theme of this film is the hypocrisy of American foreign policy. It's quite explicit about this and explores it not just through the Peacemaker, but also the overall plot of the US using a foreign power for its own means until that country becomes less friendly and the US ends in a military force. The satire reminded me of RoboCop, which also used excessive violence and a superhero type plot to hang its criticisms on. The violence also serves another purpose. It doesn't revel in the gore, cutting away from it pretty quickly, but it shows enough to make a point that is important in a world of action films made for families where people get shot and just fall over, that violence is ugly and horrific and has consequences. The recent trend of sanitized violence in order to make a family-friendly film is more responsible for desensitizing audiences to violence than any of the so-called video nasties were. It's also worth noting how meaningful so many of the characters' deaths in this film are. The death of the first team is down to the unchecked, unrestricted, willful negligence of the team's boss, who holds human life in scant regard compared with their own desire to be powerful. When the real team attempt to rescue Flag from who it turns out are allies, they end up killing them because they are given bad intelligence and aren't in a position to question their orders. Rick Flagg's death at the hands of Peacemaker shows just how difficult it is to do the right thing. Peacemaker's own death comes about because of his stubborn adherence to an ideology, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that his heroes are actually the villains. His dogmatism is his downfall. When they finally do defeat Starro, it's the most poignant of villain deaths I think I've seen. He's a giant starfish-looking monster who turns people into zombies, but before American astronauts basically kidnapped him so they could attempt to turn him into a weapon, he just wanted to float around space looking at the stars. In a slightly different telling of the story, he would be the hero. The only death that rankled me was Polka Dot Man. Yes, he has his big hero moment, and in that moment completes his story arc, but it did feel like the actual death was there for the sake of a joke, which felt out of place based on his arc and the way other character deaths had been dealt with. It felt a little cheap in a film where none of the other main deaths felt that cheap. Whether you choose to buy into the themes or not, it shouldn't really detract from your enjoyment of this film, as it's still an incredibly well made and enjoyable movie. I actually enjoyed it more on repeat viewings, and I suspect others will too. Thank you. Goodbye.